Welcome to Behind the DM Screen. This is our weekly podcast where we talk about the tips, tricks, and pitfalls of being a dungeon master. We are the team behind WorldSmith, which is a platform that we built over the last year for DMs. You can create amazing homebrew on it. You can also use it to organize your campaigns and connect with other GMs and players. My name is Ian. I'm the head of creative marketing content at WorldSmith.
I'm Cameron. I'm the head of socials.
I'm Matt. I'm the token business dude.
Yeah, Matt's in charge is what it comes down to. This week we're going to be talking about a couple things. Before we dive into it, though, we do have a puzzler from last week. Most weeks we bring up a challenging question that might have happened at your table, and then we discuss the best way to solve that problem. So last week's puzzler came from Cameron. So Cameron, quickly introduce the puzzler, and then one at a time we will give our answers of how we'd solve it.
Okay, to summarize it, I had a dungeon master who I found out was cheating for our benefit on rolls. It was impossible for one of our characters to die because the dungeon master would make it physically impossible for us to make wrong decisions. In other words, F around and find out, right? We were incapable of doing so because he was lying on his rolls. If you found out that your dungeon master, who you've been playing with for over a year in a campaign that you've enjoyed very much, has been lying to you, would you confront them or would you try to, I don't know, sweep it under the rug?
It's a good question. I'm all about passive aggression in general.
Ooh, love this.
And not dealing with your problems like a rational adult. So
super good business owner.
Great way to deal with things in general. So I probably would have just made it really awkward at the table every chance I got. Just if I saw him fudging a roll, I'd just get out something random from my pocket, I don't know, like a piece of food or rubber duck or something weird, and just roll with that instead and be like, that's a 22. And then if he makes a big deal about it,
then you call him out.
I can just deflect and put all the blame on him and get mad at him in front of the table.
This is so revealing.
I did not know that was how you deal with something like that.
No,
This explains all the rubber ducks on your desk. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I've been doing something wrong.
I don't know. Honestly, it's hard to say. It really depends on what the DM is like and what the dynamic of the party is. I mean, if it's really something that you can't confront him, or if you have talked to him about it in a personal setting, one-on-one, he's not doing anything, you can honestly try to do some things to improve the game and add a little bit of flavor to things. I don't know. I would never recommend this in a typical setting, but attack your own party if everybody's left at one hit point and be I don't know, you're caught under control or something. But I think at the end of the day, the best answer is always to just talk to your DM. Yeah.
It's funny that you say attack your own party because that's kind of what I ended up doing.
Oh, really?
I talked to my dungeon master separately because I wanted to play as a new character so bad. And I asked him if I could have a villain arc and turn against my party. And so within a few sessions, I was able to fight them. I obviously died, which is a whole different story because I should have at least taken one other player down with me.
Right.
But the dungeon master
sounds like he was fudging rolls again.
Yeah. I think for me it comes down to it sounds like there's maybe just a misunderstanding on your dungeon master's part of what makes the game fun.
I think so.
And so I think that I would probably just have, if it was me, I'd probably have a one-on-one conversation over Discord or just in person with them if you know them well enough. And basically just be hey man, I've noticed you're doing this. But then I think rather than being this is a problem and it's making me angry, I think I would maybe just get to hey, it seems like you're really afraid of having a player die. What's up with that? And just get there. You maybe they're well, I think if somebody died, then I would be afraid they would leave the party. Or I think if somebody died, I'd be afraid it would ruin the game or something. And I think I would just talk to them kind of honestly about well, actually I've been in parties before where players died. It's been this fun thing for the story. They get to roll up a new character. It feels really dramatic. And then maybe just be what if you just, maybe you should ask other players at the table, hey, how would people feel if somebody were to die? Because my suspicion is most D&D players at the end of the day, like you said, you get excited about rolling up a new character, most D&D, there might be one person at the table who's I really don't want my player to die. And then that's a little awkward and they might have to work that out with their DM. But I think it sounds like that this person just has a misunderstanding of what makes the game fun. And they think that what makes the game fun is everybody getting to continue to level up their character no matter what. And I think just having also like killing characters in D&D is so hard because death saves are, we talked about this previously. Death saves are really, really hard to fail. There's so many, there's health potions, there's medicine checks, there's like, you can do so many things to save a player. So I would also just encourage them to be like, yeah, man, like some of the best sessions I've ever played is when somebody gets to 0 hit points and they have to start making death saves. And that happens to me. I love a campaign where that happens every session, and like 98% of the time when someone's making death saves, they don't die. So I would just like, I think it just comes down to them maybe misunderstanding how the rules work. Of like, I don't think you need to stress out about this as much as you think you need to.
That's a great point. Yeah, we talked about it. D&D, like the fun of it is interpreted differently for every single player.
Yeah.
Some people like gritty, players are dying every session. Other times, death is like a major inconvenience, and you've had this character for so long, and it's like, why would I bother making a new one and starting over a story when I've dedicated this chunk of my life to like a group story, right? So I get that. Those are good responses, you guys.
And honestly, even adding to what you were saying, there's a million ways to bring a player back to life in D&D.
Like it's just you could
if they
filter the
love
game.
that character,
plan something out.
have him roll up his brother or something like that, and I'm here to avenge my brother's death. And like
they can go to another plane and find his spirit. And
Exactly.
It's turned into a cool
storytelling.
thing.
Have a plot twist.
Totally.
I mean, there's spells in the spellbook that bring people back from the dead. So it's like it's not that.
it's not a big deal.
It's not insane. Yeah, totally.
If you're a DM and you feel the need to fudge to like protect your players, it's not necessary unless you're playing with probably children or something like that. Like I've played with my little sister. She's like 7, and I'm like, all right, I'm not gonna kill her right now, but
I'd be the opposite, dude.
I go hard on my kids.
but maybe not. I
Put
guess.
those younger siblings in their place.
That's right. You got to teach them young. Alrighty. We are going on to our user questions. So I have a list here of 20 questions that are generated from our Discord users. WorldSmith has a very fun Discord that we'd love to have you join. Before I roll the big D20, though, we're all going to roll initiative to see what order we answer the question in.
Been rolling real bad today. 5.
I got a 7.
A 9 while we all roll poorly. So I'll go first, then Cameron, then Matt. Okay, let's see what question we have today. Question 19. This is a question from T Sizzle on the Discord. T Sizzle asks, how do you as a GM manage expectations about games you put together so as not to be angry, sad, or disappointed if it didn't pan out the way you wanted to? That's a great question.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
I guess I'm first.
Steal this and read it again.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think basically like if you have a plan for a session, you're really excited about the direction it goes, and the players just take an opposite direction. I would say for me, I do have experienced this before. I would say 2 things. Maybe it all it boils down to one thing for me, which is I think play the long game. I think you might be really I think identify what it was you were excited about. Let's say you think they're going to go to this inn, and you think an innkeeper is actually going to deceive them and like stab them in their beds. And then instead they decide that they are worried about the inn, and so they camp in a campsite outside the town, right? Yeah. And suddenly you're like, oh man, I got this cool NPC, I had this cool situation, I got this thing, and it's like, it's disappointing. You put a lot of prep work into it. Just play the long game though. Just be like, guess what? There's gonna be more inns in more towns. So hold on to that one. Or just be willing to think fast on your feet and be like, instead of maybe you can probably have a similar situation happen, but now maybe it just happens in the campsite where they're camping outside. They're like, we're gonna camp outside. I'm gonna be like, oh, well, there's a merchant who's outside, and he's also set up a tent there, and he sees where you guys are camping, and maybe that guy goes and stabs them in their bed, and you can just pull over the same NPC sheet you had for the innkeeper. So I think it's a combination of be willing to think on your feet, but then also I think it's never gonna feel good to players if they can tell that you're mad about their choices. That's a really uncomfortable situation to be in. If you're projecting as a DM, come on guys, why'd you do that? That's so dumb. Immediately, the energy really will leave your game. So I think just take a breath, have a Buddhist moment where you're just I do not need to be attached to this. Recognize that the players are having fun and store that one away for a later date. And I think overall your game's going to be better. That's my response.
That's a really good response. When I go into prepping a session, I have maybe 5 to 10 bullet points of things I want to have happen, and I don't go any farther beyond that. But the important thing about these bullet points is I'm not bullet pointing outcomes, I'm bullet pointing hooks. So I'm not saying an assassin comes into this specific tavern and stabs this specific player. Instead, what I'm saying is this named NPC is going to attempt to attack someone. And I leave it at that. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know necessarily who he's going to attack. But when I read the situation, I'm like, okay, the players have decided to have these sleeping arrangements. This person is probably going to pick off this person. Are they going to win? I don't have that outcome set, but I do have that hook. And I think as long as you don't set expectations for outcomes, you will never be disappointed when the players take a wrong turn.
I love that. Yeah, that's great advice.
Planning hooks is like that's really smart advice.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I never had this issue like I would feel disappointed, but I definitely, when I was first starting to be a DM, I would plan out too much, I would say. And I would be like, all right, here's the encounter. I'd plan out a hook, but I would plan out not necessarily the outcome, but a little bit. I'd like have a cool piece of dialogue for when this guy dies or something like that. And like, just by doing that, I feel like I would unconsciously push my players in a certain direction. And I probably even caught myself just making it happen regardless of like what they were doing a couple times, which is the worst thing you want to do. And I never did it like super unorganically, but you don't want to force the story to go in a certain direction. So I think I really agree with what you were saying for that. But I also think when it comes to being a DM, initially you probably just want to facilitate a really good story. And I think if you take more pride and happiness in being able to facilitate that story, just in general, like, then you're going to be really happy with what happens in the session. Because if you say, all right, here were some of my hooks, and I got to help and watch my players do something incredible and wild and totally unexpected to even me, like, that's really fun. And being able to do that is something that's difficult to do without like a certain level of skill with improvisation and, just being able to role play and all this crazy stuff. So, I mean, I think if you start to take pride in that instead of getting excited about a certain specific storyline, I think you'll be happier as a DM in general.
That's a great point.
I 100% agree
On
with
your
that.
note-taking point, I wanted any new DMs to know I have like all the notes on OneNote for every session I've ever ran. And early on, my session notes were several pages long for every single session. And I wanted to bring up, I told you, Matt, the notes I took for this previous WorldSmith session. There was one sentence. It said, John Kravitz, Sir Cleans a Lot. You've traveled 2 days to the village of Brewvale, where a strange later invited you to a tavern for a supposed festival. Don't know what that means. And then below it, there's just one word that says lop. I don't know what lop is. Maybe if I rewatch
I
that
remember
session, I'll know.
more about the session that he ran than he does.
That's the thing.
Or his notes do.
My job isn't to plan out the story. It's just to give the players opportunity to tell their story. And I'm just kind of the middleman in that process. So don't plan heavy. If you don't plan, you won't be disappointed. That's a very bad piece of advice. Plan a little bit.
No, but
That's great for our conversation
it leads us
today.
right
Yeah,
into the main topic for today,
Yes.
which our main question for today is how important is world building? Which I think basically gets at the core of this is how much of the story do you think you should be planning out before? How much time do each of us as DMs like put into kind of building out the entirety of the world and everything before we present it to the players versus how much do we basically let the players completely dictate what the world is? So that's our question for today. How important is world building? Who wants to go first?
We just a little bit heard your opinion.
Yeah,
so
you go ahead, Matt.
I'm on the opposite side of things. I'm probably a little bit too far on the building out your world setting, and probably more than most DMs are, at least. I think it's a little bit just my personality. I like to plan things out a little bit. I also really do like to improvise and make things really fun on the spot, but it's just been a little bit easier for me as I've built up those skills to have stuff to work with. So I think especially if you're someone who's really new to being a DM or really new to D&D in general, it can be helpful to have some stuff to work off of. But I think as a general rule, it's never good if you're spending like more time preparing the world than you are like any individual session. That's like my general rule for myself. So the way that I typically do it is I try to have an actual session 0, whether it's one-on-one phone calls with players or I sit down with people before a campaign. And I try to like prep the world before that session 0 where everybody builds their characters. And then I do it just like I would a normal session. And then for each session, I do a little bit of prep. The reason I do it is like when it comes to storytelling for me, I find it a lot easier to come up with quests or to come up with NPCs or to come up with, you know, basic ideas like that if I have really, really broad ideas. So I'm like, okay, I know that in this world there are 2 or 3 major conflicts, right? And I can maybe have like a couple sentences about each of those conflicts. And I'm like, all right, all of a sudden, if somebody runs into an NPC in the middle of the campaign, I have something really easy to just pull out of the back of my head to come up with a quest, to come up with like anything, you know? Just because I've had a little bit of planning done already. And I feel like the same thing I do a little bit of that for like, I don't know, like the main campaign itself, like the hooks there, sometimes even for cities or small towns, stuff like that. So I do probably lean a little bit heavier, but I'm never like much more than a page or 2 or 3 for most worlds that I'm prepping for. There have been some campaigns where I go really intense, but that's normally once I've played further and further, and as the story's gone further, like
It develops over time.
Yeah, and I want to give more details for the players as that goes. But for me, I think the biggest reason, just going back to basics, I like to do a decent amount because it makes it easier for me to improvise and provide on theme or on brand stories for my players throughout the campaign.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I'm kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum. I think approaching a new campaign, I have a world map, I have all the locations, and that's really all I start with. I decide on a town that the players are going to start at, and I develop just that small piece, right? So anything that's important, essentially. If there's a mayor, what's their name, you know, what are 1 or 2 plot hooks, and I leave it at that. And then each session after, you can kind of just develop stuff as time goes on. Something interesting I learned in film school was that people don't care about a story unless there's a character to care about. Everything revolves around character. And I can't tell you how many campaigns I've started where the DM starts the session by going on a 5-minute monologue about like the political intrigue of their world. And I'm like writing down random notes that I'm going to have no idea what those notes mean in the next 10 minutes. And they just lose me, right? But if you, like you said, Matt, develop over time the world as the players get more and more comfortable with playing as their characters, I think that the personal investment into a world just kind of comes naturally as they care about their character and their circumstances.
Totally.
Yeah. I think we're all kind of circling around like the same thing, which is I think like, I use Lord of the Rings as an example a lot because I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, you know, and I think it's actually been unfortunate that I think Tolkien's work has kind of been used by a lot of people to defend maybe the importance of having super, super complex worlds that are really fleshed out. Because Tolkien was really nerdy about that stuff, and he wrote entire languages and came up with whole, you know, genealogies and stuff like that. However, you need to think about the fact that if you started reading the Silmarillion before you read The Hobbit, you would never have gotten through it. Like if you started with the Silmarillion, he wouldn't have sold a single copy of the other books, right? And even The Hobbit has way less world building, you know, than you know, The Hobbit like is way easier accessible than even Lord of the Rings is.
Super basic.
And when you look at the way that Lord of the Rings starts, right? You have, again, we see the world through the eyes of a character, right? We have a character who's very ignorant to what's going on around them. And they are just given little pieces of knowledge as it goes larger and larger and larger. And you have a map. I think a map is lovely. Like players love to see a map because it gives them some sense of the larger thing. And there's just excitement. It's just like there's woods over there, there's forests over there, there's a ruin over there. There's like, that is cool. But like, you don't want to tell the players what all that stuff is. It's going to take all the magic out of it, right? You look at a map at the beginning of if you're reading Fellowship of the Ring and the maps in the first 2 pages, and you look at it and then you're like, oh my God, you start reading and you're like, they're just way up here in this little Shire thing. And you're like, I wonder what's all the way down there, like I wonder what Erebor is. And it's like, you're going to have to read to find out.
Yeah.
So it's like, then the adventure begins and they meet characters along the way and they get introduced to this larger world. And by the end, you're able to kind of speak to the interpolitical conflicts of all these different nations. But I mean, that's because the characters have gone on these big journeys and they've met NPCs that are from each of those areas and, have gone through these conflicts and stuff. So I think I would say definitely it can be helpful, I think, definitely helpful to have a map. I think definitely helpful to maybe have some idea of, I want a big bad to be down here. I want, something over there. But I think the worst thing you can do is be monologuing to your players about history. It's just and then the one area where I think this is a little controversial and I think stray away, I think, from a lot of DMs is I actually do quite a bit of foresight, thinking ahead, sometimes 10, 15, 20 sessions of plot points that I do want to have happen, but they're always character based. Like for me, I start to pick up in a campaign on this character, they really want to travel to other planes or something. So then I'm like, okay, well, I would really like that moment to happen where they can discover, a Spelljammer ship or something. Yeah. But in my head, I'm like, they're not actively thinking in their heads, we need to find a Spelljammer ship. So it's in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, where's gonna be the right place? I literally write it down. And I have to be careful here because I'm currently running this campaign and there would be so many spoilers if I showed this. But I have a sheet of bullet points of this is gonna happen, and this is gonna they're gonna find this ship, and then it's going to allow them to go to this plane so that this happens, and then because that thing happens, this person's going to find out about it, and so that person's going to come back for revenge. I have that stuff, but I'm not picky about when it happens or the details of how they get there so much. You know what I mean? I know I want to do that stuff because it sounds fun, but that might be 20 sessions in the future. That literally, and that comes back to kind of that question we answered earlier. Is I try not to get too hung up on exactly when. Yeah. That hammer falls a little bit, because if they want to go explore some wood over here and do this and this thing, then I'm kind of that's fine. You guys are having fun. That's great. I'll find some ways to weave in a couple little details, and I'll just know in the back of my head when they do decide to go to that ruin eventually. Or sometimes I'll just I don't know, throw an old fashioned okay, well, they're chasing this guy and they want to kill him, and guess where that guy's gonna run to? He's gonna run to that ruin. You know what I mean? I think there's lots you can do to, if you have a macro idea of I would love for them to go to this cool mountain that I have in the back of my head. I think there's lots of little ways you can just kind of gently, pull people towards that without having, some person come along and say, tell them explicitly, you have to go to the mountain for these and these reasons, and this is what you're going to find. That's just kind of the way I run things, at least.
This is really interesting. I think a lot of DMing is giving your players, this is going to sound bad, the illusion of choice.
No, totally.
Because realistically, if you were just nutsos about world building and every single town had a building layout and you knew exactly where each plot hook was going to be, where every single NPC was going to be, you live, breathe, and eat just this world that you've designed, right? Realistically, your players are not going to reach the plot hooks at the times that you want them to reach. Yeah. I've seen new dungeon masters fall into that pitfall where they're just waiting for the players to stumble across a certain NPC because they're not going to interfere. Yeah. But if I love that you mentioned all of that in your bit, because it's realistically, if you just have a pool of resources that you're planning on delivering to your party, and your job is just pull the trigger on when is it right to deliver this NPC or plot hook or location to the party, that's your job as the storyteller, and then the players just kind of do what they want with that information.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, and sometimes it can happen even sooner. This will be, this is not a spoiler, but this is a behind the DM screen moment for my current party. But
they do watch these videos, by the way.
I know they do. Yeah. So Justin was playing a Warforged, and I, for reasons that I will not disclose, needed Justin to die. I needed Justin's character to die, and I had assumed that this would happen in another situation that I had planned. I was like, okay, I've got this thing. I think it's going to happen in a while. they got into a fight with some very overpowered. I had set up that it was very overpowered. They dove right in head first, had a terrible battle plan, and then it started to become clear to me that Justin's character was going to die, and I was just like, well, this is happening now then. Like this is what it is, and it added some great tension. So I also think like it can, I think, be helpful to have some of those like things that you kind of want to have happen in the back of your mind. Don't be too stressed if it maybe takes them a minute to get there. Don't be too stressed if you have to like twist some things to get them there. Also, don't be stressed if they just like go right in and then it's just like, all right, like here we are. Now I guess we hit that plot point a little faster than I thought we would.
Yeah.
It's kind of just like reading the room, but it's reading the world.
It's tricky. And it does take practice. And that thing that you said, I think, is really valid. Like, I now don't have to prep as much because I have a greater sense of trust for my players making fun choices and me just understanding the game well enough, understanding storytelling enough to be able to think on my feet. So, like, I think if you're in a situation where you're running your first couple sessions and you're feeling like, oh my gosh, like, this is so much work to prep every single one of these, I would just say, like, stick with it. Like, the prep is helpful. It's going to help you start to wrap your mind around how the game works and just how players work. And I promise you that as you continue to run your games, especially if you're running consistent games with one party, you're going to get to a point where you're like, I know what they're going to do because I just know that they love, kicking doors in and looting and killing and stuff like that. So then you're just like, I'm not going to bother to set up a whole situation that's like an intense diplomatic thing in the courtroom. It's like, they're not going to want to do that. They're going to want to like, sneak in through the back door and steal all the gold from the king. So it's like, you're just going to start to get a better sense for what is easy to dangle in front of them, that what's the bait that they're going to take in a way that
learn how to predict their
options in a way that they're going to feel like, oh, this is fun and we're loving it. You know what I mean? As opposed to, I do think one of the worst situations I think you can be in as a player is to feel like you're trying to guess what the DM wants you to do. Yeah. If you go into a town and there's nothing, and you're just like, I look in the market, and they're like, you don't see anyone. And then you're like, I look in the bar, and you're like, you don't see anyone. Like that's just boring. It's just lame. So it's just like, if they look in the market, guess what? The thing you want them to find should probably be in the market. Like, just don't I think play this guessing game with them where like you have to find the one thing I hid in the huge town.
I was about to say that. I was gonna say the word like. If just a couple indicators of whether or not you're world building enough or not enough is if your players just are sitting there and you can tell that they have no idea what to do, you're probably not giving them enough to work off of. Yeah. But if you see them like almost looking to you before making a decision, or you find that every single thing that you have planned is exactly what they do, you're probably world building too much and forcing them too much down a path. I've been in both situations as a DM and as a player. As a player, it's horrible to be in either one, but if you have like somewhere in the middle where your players always have something to work off of and there's always something that they're actively trying to do, you're giving them enough. But if it's not going to plan, that means you're also not giving them too much.
And give them stuff too that like I talked about this in DM tips, but like give them stuff that's actionable too. Like showing up to a town and knowing the name of the king and knowing that the king has like a grandmother who was an elf or something, not helpful to the players. But showing up to a town where magic is illegal in the town,
helpful for the players.
Suddenly there's conflict. Suddenly like they have to be like, ooh, do we have to hide these items? Suddenly all the spellcasters are going to have to play different. So like I also just like think about what does this world building mean to the players? If they show up in places that are racist against certain races, if they show up in places that have a lot of money and therefore there's going to be like people expecting them to spend a lot, or people are going to look down at them because they're poor. Like just think about like what is this actually? Is this going to set up interesting situations where the players are suddenly like, ooh, we have to problem solve in a new way? Because like if you spend all this time writing like a whole backstory for a town and a history, but it basically gives nothing for the players to actually like think about in the session, it's just going to go in one ear and out the other, and it's really not going to help them. But if they show up in a place where you're like, magic's illegal, now they're like, oh, magic's illegal, and they're going to remember that. Like they're going to think back to that town and be like, that was that town where magic was illegal.
I think the reason why puzzles are consistently like a pitfall for a lot of sessions is because there's only one like outcome. There's only one solution, and it's very hard to improvise a puzzle when you have exactly what they need to do to solve it. And I think that applies to every single aspect of D&D. Like it's very good to just have multiple
ways to win.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. If you see them struggling forever, just let it work. Like I don't know. But
totally. Yeah. Well, we've reached the end of our time, dear people. But
Time
I
went
don't-
by so fast.
time flies when you're talking about
Yeah.
D&D. We would love to hear your answers, though, in the comments or in the Discord of just how your feelings about world building. If you think that we're completely wrong, then do tell us. We'd love to hear that opinion. We'll be back next week with a new puzzler, more questions to answer. And have a great week playing D&D.
Great. Thanks, guys.
See you guys.